I had an unfair amount of spoiled brat rage towards my parents in my late teens. And it was because I felt they had whitewashed my childhood by constantly putting me in white spaces. And what I wasn't ready to deal with at that point was I wasn't mad at my parents for providing me access to these spaces. I was mad at the kid I became in those spaces. And I don't think my parents fully understood that I was struggling because they didn't grow up like I did. They grew up Black in Nashville, Tennessee during the peak of the Civil Rights Movement. And they were already teenagers by the time Nashville started to integrate schools. September 9th, 1957 marked the first day that Black and white kids were able to go to school together. The very next day, on September 10th, one of those schools exploded, thanks to 100 sticks of dynamite and clearly a strong will to keep things the same. Now, I often think about the bravery and foresight those parents had to have enrolling their kids in those schools, because it was a choice. And they had already experienced the threats of intimidation just at the mere thought of putting their Black kids at those white schools. Forget about the spitting and the taunting and the rock throwing they had to physically endure as they walked into the building that first day with their children. I've never properly honored my parents for having a front row seat to that level of indignity for most of their childhood. So now as a parent and as an adult, I understand what they were trying to do. They were trying to give me and my sister the keys to all the doors that were locked for them growing up. And places, towns, schools that are often deemed high opportunity, well, they're also often predominantly white and sometimes always white, all white. And adapting in those spaces isn't a new phenomenon for Black folks. Listen, I code switch like I breathe. Code switching is slipping in and out of an alternate way of speaking, depending on your surroundings. And it's a survival skill for Black folks. And W.E.B. Du Bois spoke about that double consciousness all the way back in 1904. He spoke about the American and the Negro, two souls in one body. And we speak about that duality often in my home. I've been married for 21 years to a Black man who never dims his light, and Blackness has come up and taken up a lot of space in our lives and the lives of our 5 children. And to deal with that, we tried to submerge them in the art, in the books, and the truth and the history of just who they are, which, as tragic as the stories are in this country for Black folks, they're also so gloriously triumphant. And exposing my kids to those truths have given them the Black consciousness that I was clearly lacking growing up. When I was 11, my mother let me know she had enrolled me in this exclusive and elite dance school. But what I heard is I was going to be living my best fame dreams with Leroy and the gang. So we ran out and we got a blue leotard. It was electric blue because it was the late 80s, and slinky earrings. And when I got there, my mom coated me in more baby oil because, you know, Black women don't do ashy. And they pointed me in the direction of my first class, and my mother was off. So I was alone. And when I opened the doors, my heart fell. She had enrolled me in a classical ballet school. And there they all were, on time, in white, identical in black leotard, pale pink tights, hair pinned up perfectly in a bun. Meanwhile, I looked like a backup dancer in a Rick James video. And they made me take out my slinky earrings. And you know, it's like a slow death taking out accessories you're not supposed to be wearing. And as I looked at us all in line, with my brown thighs glistening in the mirror, I heard that Sesame Street song in my head. One of these things is not like the other. One of these things doesn't belong. And when I got in the car with my mother, I lost it. I had held it together for most of the day, but I went on and on about how I couldn't believe she sent me there and that I was never going back. And my mother's response, stripped in the resilience that Black moms coat everything in: you'll be fine, I'll get you what you need, but you're going back, and you're lucky to be there, Sacha. You're lucky to be there. I wore this like a badge of honor in white spaces for most of my adolescence. And it wasn't as if I didn't know I was Black or I wasn't proud to be Black. I love my family. But I was so proud to be this new and improved version of Black that I thought was so refined that white people couldn't help but let me into their spaces. And that I hoped by proximity to whiteness, I wouldn't have to deal with all the racial traumas Black folks have to endure every day. I was bugging. And in those moments, I elevated white normalcy and white supremacy as a kid. That's what internalized racism looks like. And the brief reward of feeling like I belonged was far outweighed by the damage I was doing to my spirit. And by the time I got to college, I became sort of a time traveler and a stay-at-home historian. And I read everything I could, from books on slavery and slave rebellions and the Jim Crow era and civil rights movement, the Black Panthers, you name it, I read it. And reading Healed Wounds, I didn't know I had. I started to feel more like a whole person and less like a caricature. And I moved back to my hometown of Middletown to raise my family. And Middletown's a very progressive and diverse college town. And we're in the last phases of building a state-of-the-art middle school to replace the middle school I went to, which was Woodrow Wilson Middle School. Now, if you know his history, he was a proud racist and died never seeing the error of his ways. So it seemed like a no-brainer. New school, new building, new name. So I joined the naming committee, which was going to be a group of community members that were going to explore some name options for the school. And I'm totally invested in this because my only son is going to be part of the first classes to attend the school. And I want a name that's worthy of him. And Woodrow Wilson Middle ain't it. Now, side note, I've now graduated from that lucky to be here narrative to new and improved, you're lucky to have me mentality. And it doesn't always translate well, I'm not gonna lie. But this is where I am. I'm claiming my space in honor of my parents and my children, and I'm coming as a whole person. No halvesies, not divided, one body, one Black American soul. So when I get to that first meeting, I go directly to a table where the committee was already sitting down. And there were 2 women of color already there. Before I could even exchange pleasantries with them, from behind me, this voice like smacked me in the back of the neck. This was supposed to be a diverse committee. This isn't a good representation of us. It was that loud and that intentional. So I was like, wow, okay, duly noted. And behind me is a group of older white men and women, and it becomes abundantly clear not everybody's excited about this name change like I am. And it was for a bunch of reasons. One of the main ones was that it would be erasing history, which was so ironic to me because Black people's contributions to this country have been crucial to our success. Yet they often have gone not written, minimized, hidden, and yes, erased. So you gotta miss me with your erasing history speech. So when I went home that night, I was livid, and I posted publicly about my experience at that first meeting. And I know that doesn't always go well, but I couldn't pretend to not hear and feel what I felt that day. And all those years of it quietly ignoring implicit and explicit biases like that have made me who I am now. And it wasn't that I didn't feel like, of course they had the right to feel how they felt. Some of them were truly nostalgic. But what was so confusing to me is they also stood hand in hand with those who cruelly mocked us for just wanting better for our kids. And then somehow the burden falls on me to figure out who's who when I'm seeing a oneness and a sameness in this group. So anyway, the post worked and people reached out and they wrote op-eds and they showed up for public forums, pre-COVID of course, and in support of this name change. It was great until it wasn't. And those pro-Woodrow Wilsoners demanded that I be removed from the committee because they didn't like the tone of my post, which was absurd and didn't happen. So they took it a step further. And they contacted my employer to let them know that I said all white people were racist. They wanted to know if my company agreed with that standpoint. They wanted to know if I had any white clients because, of course, they needed to be alerted. And they signed it a concerned parent. They threatened my livelihood over a lie because they were threatened by me. And I haven't mentioned that I'm a real estate agent. And the home ownership gap between Black and white Americans in this country is larger now than it was in 1960, when it was actually legal to discriminate against us. So yeah, most of my clients are white people. And as that concerned parent wanted to let me know, I need white people to like me. But not at the expense of my truth or my spirit, because I'm not doing that anymore. But I was scared. I work for a high-end luxury brokerage that, for a second when I signed that contract with them, I wondered if I was good enough to work for them, because even in my mid-40s, I have to be cognizant of not internalizing those questions of my worth in spaces that don't reflect me. So when my broker called me to let me know about this email, I thought I was going to lose my job. But luckily for me, she stood in the pain, in the rage of that moment, and she had my back. And she dismissed that email. But after talking to my family, we realized this was just going to get worse. And I decided it would be best if I stepped down from the committee. But about a week later, an old classmate reached out, and she was so excited because she was going to be submitting a name to the naming committee, and she was collaborating with a Wesleyan professor on this. And I remember being crazy dismissive of her during this call because I felt helpless. Like, what was I going to do? But I couldn't unhear what she said that day, and it echoed for days. It was Beeman Middle. And you're all looking at me like, who the hell are the Beemans? So I'll explain. The Beemans are a family of Black abolitionists. Caesar Beeman gained his freedom by fighting in his master's place in the Revolutionary War. They were actively involved in the Underground Railroad. They moved to Middletown. They bought land and subdivided it and sold it off to other freed slaves. I know. I had to pivot. And I actually learned in the process that it's Common Council who has final naming authority over all city-owned property. So they became my focus. And I worked with friends in the community and even my oldest daughter to get people who had the same shared vision for the town that we had. And I have to say, the end results were the most diverse group of people ever elected together in city history. And it included our first Black councilwoman. It was historic. And that day could only be topped by one thing for me. On August 3rd, 2020, that Common Council voted to name our new middle school Beeman Middle. Caesar Beeman picked his own name instead of keeping a slave name. Beeman. Be a man. This school in a predominantly white town in Connecticut is named after a former enslaved man so intentional in claiming his humanity that he picked a name to reflect that desire. I felt like I won something, like my family had won something. Our community had tapped into that shared responsibility to elevate and tell these stories of these great Black American heroes. And I mean, with 2020, I needed this. With protests heard all over the world, and after the murder of George Floyd, our mayor created an anti-racism task force. And I'm proud to say that I was appointed co-chair. And the work continues. There's so much work to do. But the work we're doing in Middletown will be transformative to the next generation of kids. All kids. I really feel like it could be done anywhere. And when I look at this now viral image of President-elect Kamala Harris walking into the White House in the shadows of a 6-year-old Ruby Bridges, who was also a first when she integrated schools in New Orleans in the 1960s. We are all in the shadows of those who come before us, and we have a shared responsibility to clear the path for those that come after us. And when I think about my son walking into Beeman Middle in the shadows of the Beeman family, I can't tell you how excited that makes me. And when I sit with all the sacrifices that were made so I can be who I am now, which is unapologetically Black in all spaces, I have to say, my mother was right. I am lucky to be here. Thank you.